Good afternoon, and welcome to yet another episode of The League of Biblical Enthusiasts. So as we promised, we are going to begin a series of episodes dealing with translations of the Bible, focusing on the New Testament. So today and the next episode or two, we'll be looking at that first 1,000 years after the originals were composed, after AD 100. And what we'll find is that some of the earliest translations of the New Testament were by missionaries who carried the gospel into regions where people did not speak the language in which the New Testament was composed, that being Greek. And of course, Greek was the standard language of the Roman Empire due to the Hellenization of Alexander the Great in the 4th century BC, as he spread Greek ideas, Greek culture, and of course the Greek language throughout the Mediterranean basin and even eastward as well. So we're looking over the next few episodes of a total of 10 different translations of the New Testament that we encounter in those first 1,000 years. Today we're looking at 5, those being Syriac, Coptic, Armenian, Georgian, and Ethiopic. So let's begin. If we look at the book of Acts, which is of course the record of the spread of Christianity in those first few decades following the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, we will find in Acts chapter 2, verses 5 and 11, this statement which shows us on that day of Pentecost, Jews and God-fearers from around the Mediterranean basin came to worship the God of Israel on that day. So let's read. Now there were staying in Jerusalem God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. When they heard this sound, of course the mighty rushing wind, a crowd came together in bewilderment because each one heard their own language being spoken. Utterly amazed, they asked, "Aren't all those who are speaking Galileans? Then how is it that each of us hears in our own native language?" Parthians, Medes, and Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt and the parts of Libya near Cyrene, visitors from Rome, both Jews and converts to Judaism, Cretans and Arabs, we hear them declaring the wonders of God in our own languages. So what this shows us is that thousands and thousands of people had converged upon Jerusalem on this feast day. And of those thousands and thousands of people who heard the gospel, many of them went back to their own countries carrying that gospel. And when they returned to their countries and their cultures, some of them realized that they could only communicate this message by way of translation. F. Bruce, a God rest his soul, New Testament historian of an earlier generation, said there may have been as many as several million Jews living in these territories by the 1st century AD. After Pentecost, many of the converted Jews went back to their homelands and spread the gospel. This necessitated, in time, a translation of the scriptures into their own language. So we'll start with the first of the early translations of the New Testament, Syriac. We'll introduce a man named Tatian, T-A-T-I-A-N. Tatian came from Mesopotamia to Rome about 150 AD. He was converted and taught by Justin Martyr. The Syriac language is a variety of Aramaic, and it emerged in Edessa, Upper Mesopotamia, during the first centuries of the Christian era. Later, Tatian was charged with heresy because of his extreme ascetic beliefs, and he returned to Mesopotamia, where he founded a group of ascetic Christians that became to be called the Encratites. Tatian composed a work which was the earliest known harmony of the four Gospels, we know as the Diatessaron, which in Greek simply means through four. So it took the four Gospels, it made a harmony of each and produced one flowing translation narrative. The Diatessaron, this harmony that Tatian compiled, was widely used by early Syriac Christians. Although the original text has not survived, it was reconstructed to an extent in 1881 by Theodore Zahn from translations and commentaries then available to him. In the early church, the Gospels at first circulated independently. Matthew was the most popular. And the Diatessaron is notable evidence for the authority already enjoyed by the Gospels in the mid to late 2nd century. Within 20 years after Tatian's harmony was written, Irenaeus was expressly arguing for the authoritative character of the four Gospels. Now, Syriac is a dialect or group of dialects of Eastern Aramaic, as we said, originating around Edessa. For centuries, several Syriac translations vied for superiority throughout this area, but around the 5th century, the Syriac Peshitta emerged. The word Peshitta simply means simple. It can also be translated common. So the Peshitta is the standard version of the Bible for churches in the Syriac tradition, including the Maronite Church, the Chaldean Catholic Church, the Syriac Catholic Church, and the Syriac Orthodox Church. The consensus within biblical scholarship, although not universal, is that the Old Testament of the Peshitta was translated into Syriac from Biblical Hebrew, probably in the 2nd century AD, and that the New Testament of the Peshitta was translated from Greek. This New Testament, originally excluding certain disputed books such as 2 Peter, 2 John, 3 John, Jude, and Revelation, had become a standard by the early 5th century. The Peshitta had from the 5th century onward a wide circulation in the East and was accepted and honored by the whole diversity of sects of Syriac Christianity. It had a great missionary influence. The Armenian and Georgian versions that we will speak about, as well as the Arabic and Persian, owe much to the Syriac. Now let's take a look at Coptic translations dealing with Christianity in Egypt. As we saw in Acts chapter 2, verse 10, following Pentecost, the gospel quickly spread into Egypt. Papyrus fragments of the New Testament have been found in the sands of Egypt, dating as possibly early as the 2nd century, in the region known as Oxyrhynchus. And there, Grenfell and Hunt and their expedition in the late 19th and early 20th century uncovered untold thousands and thousands of papyri, both biblical and other material, to the extent that many of these papyri discovered 120 years ago have not even been investigated. There are so many of them. There is, as a matter of fact, an ongoing project called the Oxyrhynchus Project, where you can go online, pull up some ancient Greek manuscripts from this region in Egypt that have not yet been translated. And if you know Greek, ancient Greek, and can read it and translate it, you will be able to contribute to the knowledge base that we're still trying to complete with these documents. The Greek language had significant influence in Egypt. Of course, the Septuagint was translated in Alexandria, Egypt in the few centuries before the birth of Christ. Native Egyptians spoke Coptic or Egyptian, and the Coptic language is kind of a mixture of Greek and native Egyptian language. The characters themselves looked like Greek. There are 6 different dialects of Coptic, the 2 most prominent being Syriac, spoken in Upper Egypt, and Bohairic in Lower Egypt. As early as the 3rd century AD, Coptic was the native language of Egypt. And as we said, Coptic is a combination of the common native Egyptian language plus Greek loan words, Greek characters, and is written in an alphabet derived from Greek. There are, as we said, those 6 different dialects of Coptic. Now, the Coptic version is one of the earliest and most important versions of the New Testament. To the present day, almost 1,000 Coptic manuscripts of the New Testament are known. Most of them represent the Syriac and Bohairic dialects. Collections of these manuscripts can be found in these libraries: University of Mississippi in Oxford, Mississippi, University of Michigan, the British Library, and the Bodleian Library at the University of Oxford. Now let's talk about the Armenian translations. The Armenians lived north of Mesopotamia between the Roman and Persian empires. And Armenia was the first nation to be officially declared Christian when its king, Tiridates III, in the late 3rd century AD, was converted by Gregory the Illuminator. And the first major document of the Armenian language was the Bible. In 397, the celebrated Mesrov Mashtots and Isaac the Catholicos resolved to translate the Bible into Armenian. Mesrov had been a court secretary and as such was well acquainted with Pahlavi, Syriac, and Greek, the 3 languages in which the royal edicts were published. Isaac had been born in Constantinople and educated there and at Caesarea. He was a good Greek scholar beside being versed in Syriac and Pahlavi, but none of these 3 alphabets was suited to express the sounds of the Armenian tongue, and therefore an alphabet had to be created for Armenians. By 406, Mesrov had succeeded in inventing an alphabet, practically the one still in use, principally by modifying the Greek and the Pahlavi characters. He and 2 of his pupils at Samosata began by translating the book of Proverbs and then the New Testament from the Greek language. Meanwhile, being unable to find a single Greek manuscript in the country, Isaac translated the church lessons from the Syriac Peshitta and published this version in 411 AD. The Armenian version is one of the earliest translations of the Bible, and some of its readings go back quite early. The number of extant copies of this version are second only to those of the Latin Vulgate, with more than 1,244 manuscripts in whole or in part of the New Testament. Now let's move on to the Georgian translations. Georgia is located at the eastern end of the Black Sea on the southern flanks of the main crest of the Greater Caucasus Mountains. It's bounded on the north and northeast by Russia, on the east and southeast by Azerbaijan, and on the south by Armenia and Turkey, and on the west by the Black Sea. Georgians, similarly to Armenians, officially adopted Christianity in the early 4th century, which contributed to the spiritual and political unification of the early Georgian states. Today, 83.4% of the population of Georgia practices Eastern Orthodox Christianity, with most of these adhering to the National Georgian Orthodox Church. The Georgian Orthodox Church is one of the world's most ancient Christian churches and claims apostolic foundation by St. Andrew. In the first half of the 4th century, Christianity was adopted as a state religion following the missionary work of St. Nino of Cappadocia. The Georgian language is unrelated to those around it, so an alphabet had to be developed before the Georgians could have the scriptures in their own language, similarly to the Armenian people. The oldest Georgian manuscript is the Adish manuscript from 897 and contains the four Gospels. The Georgian version is a tertiary version from either the Syriac or Armenian versions, meaning it is a translation of a translation from a translation. So its value in determining the earliest Greek is not great, but it does help in understanding, corroborating the old Syriac versions. Lastly, today we will look at Ethiopic translations. Now, Ethiopia, or Abyssinia, its older name, received the gospel. How did Ethiopia receive the gospel? It's not clearly known. Some would associate the Ethiopian eunuch's conversion in Acts 8 with its introduction into the country, and this may well be. Nonetheless, inscriptional evidence confirms that the faith was clearly established by the 4th century. By the 5th or 6th century, portions of the Bible were translated into Ethiopic, or Ge'ez, as Old Ethiopic is called. The translation was probably made by monks who fled to Ethiopia due to persecution by Byzantine rulers. At present, the oldest surviving Ethiopic text is a copy of the four Gospels from the 10th century, held in the Abba Garima Monastery in Ethiopia. The monastery's important holdings include 2 illuminated Garima Gospels, which have been restored. Now, what do we mean by illuminated manuscripts? Those are manuscripts that are handwritten and include illustrations and often inked in gold, purple, silver. They are absolutely beautiful documents to withhold. Most biblical scholars had previously proposed that these Gospels must have been written in the 10th century or later. However, recent radiocarbon dating carried out at Oxford University has confirmed a date between 390 and 570 for the first Garima Gospel, likely the earlier of the two. And if this dating stands, then they are the earliest surviving dated Christian illuminated manuscripts. So stay tuned, because in our next episode, we will look at the 5 other ancient New Testament translations. And then we'll move on to translations of the New Testament and the Bible into early English, Middle English, then of course moving on to modern English and looking at different translations, how they came about, who translated these documents into English. Were they trained? Were they good translations? Do they still hold up? Well, we've got lots to cover, and I appreciate your patience, and I hope you learned something, and I appreciate any comments you have on the things that we talked about today, questions or anything otherwise that might educate me as well on these matters. I appreciate your time. So like, subscribe, do that thing, and spread the word. Thank you, and we'll see you